The Human Voice Project. Stories worth hearing. When It Was Saigon, the director's cut. This is episode 7. Hello, I'm Coach Gary Micheloni. I want to welcome you back to the Human Voice Project. Stories worth hearing, because every voice has a story and every story has a voice. So today we come to episode 7. It's the concluding episode of our director's cut of When It Was Saigon, an anthology of the Vietnam War era. Over the past 6 episodes, we've had the privilege of hearing stories representing all services of the United States Armed Forces, alongside the experiences of our Australian allies and the soldiers of the Republic of Korea who also served during the Vietnam War. Along the way, we've discovered that this anthology is about much more than military history. It's about people, it's about courage, it's about friendship, it's about sacrifice. Ultimately, it's about remembering. We've met infantrymen, Marines, sailors, soldiers, airmen, combat engineers, helicopter crews, truck drivers, corpsmen, and others whose lives were forever changed by the Vietnam era. We've been reminded that service took many forms. Some served in combat, some served in military hospitals, some flew above the battlefields, others cared for those returning home. Every contribution mattered. We also learned that those who served were never alone. Behind every uniform stood parents, husbands and wives, children, brothers and sisters, and lifelong friends. Families served too. Their sacrifices may have looked different, but they were sacrifices just the same. And this anthology also reminds us that courage wasn't limited to people alone. The military working dogs who served beside their handlers protected lives and saved lives and remained loyal to the very end. They too deserve to be remembered. And we remember those families whose sacrifice can never truly be measured. Our Gold Star families. Their loved ones gave everything in service to our country, and we honor that memory. And we honor those who continue to carry that loss. Narrating this anthology has been one of the greatest privileges of my career. These aren't fictional characters. These aren't dramatizations. They're real people sharing real memories in their own words. Hey, if you haven't already received your complimentary Director's Cut companion guide, just simply visit thehumanvoiceproject.com. And while you're there, I hope you'll consider joining our growing community. But enough about me. I've got 4 veterans, great folks that you just have to meet. First, we'll hear from Sergeant Michael Custance of the Royal Australian Regiment. In Blowfly Monday, he reminds us that Australia's service members stood shoulder to shoulder with American and Allied forces throughout the Vietnam War. Next is Michael Boehme, a United States Navy corpsman. Although he never deployed to Vietnam, he served at Naval Air Station Alameda, Balboa Naval Hospital, and Oak Knoll Naval Hospital, caring for service members returning from the war. His story reminds us that military service during the Vietnam era reached far beyond the battlefield. Our third story comes from John Jakeway of the 101st Airborne Division. In Back from the Grave, he shares an extraordinary story of survival and the enduring bond between those who served together. And finally, we'll hear from Russell Clark, a United States Marine with the 7th Marine Regiment. His chapter, Grunts on Angel Wings, brings this remarkable anthology to a moving and unforgettable conclusion. 4 veterans, 4 unforgettable stories, together completing a collection of 27 stories worth hearing. Before we begin, I'd like to leave you with one final thought. The Chuck team, thank you for preserving these remarkable memories. And to the 27 veterans who entrusted him with their stories, thank you for your service. To those who are still with us, and to those who have since passed, we remember you. To every family represented in these stories, thank you. Whenever I meet someone who tells me that a son or daughter has served or is serving in our nation's military, I make it a point to thank them for lending their child to the service of this country. I believe those families deserve our gratitude too. And to every Gold Star family, please know that your loved ones are remembered here with honor and with heartfelt thanks. Although today concludes with our 7-episode director's cut of When It Was Saigon, I hope it doesn't conclude your journey with this remarkable anthology. Stories like these deserve to be revisited. New memories surface, new perspectives emerge, and from time to time we'll return to this project to continue the conversation, to reflect, to remember, and perhaps to welcome a few more voices connected with these extraordinary stories. Because that's what the Human Voice Project is all about. As long as there are stories worth hearing, there will be conversations worth continuing. Now, let's listen. I'm Coach Gary. Chapter 24, Blowfly Monday, as reported by Sergeant Michael Custance, E5, 110th Signal Squadron, Australian Army, RAR, Vietnam, 1967 to 1968. Whilst serving in South Vietnam, my unit provided communications to the Australian Task Force. We were generally located in Saigon, Nhu Duat, and Vung Tau, which is south of Saigon in the beach area of Cap St. Jacques. The following events took place in this area during my tour of Vietnam. The terrain in Vung Tau is primarily sandhills. Consequently, we had to build our own latrines to fit the conditions of our environment. These latrines, called dunnies, which is our Australian term of reference for a commode, were our pride and joy. There is nothing quite like having proper facilities to relieve oneself while fighting a war. Our dunnies consisted of one building for senior NCOs, which was a 2-seater, and one for other ranks, ORs, better known as diggers, which was a 6-seater. Each week we were required to do what is known as a burn-off. Yes, we burned our waste to prevent it from piling up and making a general nuisance of itself. It was surely the most disgusting detail any troop could ever pull while living in a large encampment of soldiers. Fortunately, being an E5, I never drew this duty of weekly burn-off. However, my friend, namely Sergeant E6 George Parker, did have a very close encounter with this task. One week, as an NCO, he drew the short straw and was required to select his weekly blowfly, the choice title of the poor digger who had to perform the ritual. George managed to make his selection from the work troop. Unfortunately, his choice from the beginning was suspect in the fine art of listening and comprehending basic orders. He instructed the selected blowfly to take a container and fill it with 1 part petrol and 5 parts diesel. Sergeant Parker then directed blowfly to pour the said mixture into the dunnies, after which he was to toss a lighted paper inside. This would complete the intended cleansing by consuming the waste material deep in the bowels of the sandy beach. Blowfly then proceeded to do what was requested of him, except in his infinite wisdom and uncanny ineptness in following orders, he prepared the mixture being 5 parts petrol and 1 part diesel. The result was an almighty explosion. We thought we had been hit with an RPG, leaving one very scared sergeant, a demolished dunny, a unit on high alert, and potential standby for a forthcoming enemy assault on our position. To me, this event could easily have been part of a MASH episode. The following is Sergeant George Parker's after-action account of the incident. It was the time between the dry and wet season at Vung Tau. I was the troop sergeant of the deployment troop of 110 Signal Squadron, and Signalman Powell was given the job to be the blowfly on a particular day. He was ordered to burn the dunnies out as the ammonia fumes from the pits was becoming unbearable. The normal fix was 5 parts diesel and 1 part petrol. I recommended to Sig Powell to reduce the mix to 5-in-1, but sadly I hadn't confirmed it with Sig Powell if he understood, as he was a bit slow. But he was a good digger. Sig Powell proceeded to mix 5 parts petrol and 1 part diesel. I had emphasized the importance of the burning to him mainly because the sergeant's dunnies were emitting a foul odor and was directly opposite my quarter. I then told him to make sure he gave the dunnies a good soaking. The day of the burn-off was usually on a Monday, Blowfly Monday, and Sig Powell went around doing his task. He allowed the dunnies to soak for 4 hours. He did the same to the other rank's dunnies, the 6-seater, which meant there was a lot of burning material enclosed. After 4 hours of soaking, I heard this whoompa and saw this great plume of black smoke shooting up into the sky, and I ran to see what in the world was happening. When I got there, Sig Powell was white as a ghost. He stood around with 3 or 4 other blokes who had singed hairs around their testicles. At the same time, soldiers of a unit to the east of Signal Hill saw the explosion in the distance, and they thought we were under attack. One of them took the photos included. I consoled Sig Powell and asked, "Powell, what in the world has happened?" "Sarge," Powell replied, "I don't know, Sarge. It just went poof and exploded." Sig Powell then headed around to burn the sergeant's dunnies, but was very apprehensive. He stood at the doorway and flicked matches toward the toilet pedestal, but was missing because he was too far away. He moved even closer to the pedestal to ignite the mix. Without a doubt, Sig Powell was becoming very anxious because there had been no ignition. Then one match got a good light, and something began to happen. And the next minute, he came bolting out the sergeant's toilet like a startled gazelle. There was a rumble and groan, and the NCO Dunning building began to shake. The concrete slab rose 6 inches off the ground, and all the power cables connected to the building went whipping around like a snake. Then there was a loud whoosh as shit went everywhere. Serving him right for his immense stupidity, Sig Powell ended up with one of the dunny seats around his neck, wearing it like a horse collar. Blood streamed down his face with the expression of, "Shit was hell." Taking immediate action, we proceeded to get a water truck to hose down the sergeant's dunny. It was a spectacular event, one that can only be imagined by the scene of all those soldiers running out of the dunnies with their arses on fire. To punctuate the debacle, 2 weeks later, the OR's dunnies, now working at full capacity, got hit with a great gust of wind, lifting the building off its concrete foundation and dropped it into a gully below, while leaving 6 diggers praying in an open-air theater. Those were the days in '68 when we had a laugh a minute. Michael Custance. My time in Vietnam ended in April 1968 with many events, good and bad, but not all retained. I served in FSB, Fire Base Anderson, during Tet. I was very proud to spend time with our USA allies, both working with them and enjoying their facilities. I hope my short story puts a smile on a few faces that understand. Chapter 25. College, the Spring of '65. Michael Boehme, U.S. Navy Corpsman, Petty Officer 3rd Class, 1961 to 1965. It was January 1965. I was a Petty Officer 3rd Class, Navy Corpsman at Naval Air Station, Alameda, California. I wanted to go to college when my tour of duty ended in November. I applied for college at every college in Oregon. My friends thought I was nuts because my high school grades could best be described in submarine terms as below sea level. I was trying to find a school that would accept me. One of my friends, Corman Butel, was taking classes at the University of California, Berkeley. He told me it was time to shut up about wanting to go to college and handed me and a couple of my friends some papers. He signed us up for an evening class at Berkeley, Philosophy 101. I don't know what strings he pulled, but I was now a college student and grateful for his effort. My chief petty officer, James Hillier, was very supportive of me, making sure my schedule would accommodate my classes. At Berkeley, the Vietnam War was ramping up. Mario Salvo, Timothy Leary, protests, sex, drugs, rock and roll were making national news. Then the captain came and told Jim, Boehme is going to Berkeley. He is taking a 4-hour war protest class with a 2-hour sit-in lab. Classes started the latter part of January. The first night I dressed in civvies and was nervous about this endeavor. Buell made sure I had the papers he had filled out for me and escorted us through all of the places we needed to go to complete the registration and get our books. He then took us to the building where the class would be and said, "Okay, I'll see you in the parking lot later." I was nervous when I found the hall where the lecture was and almost walked out. I was barely able to find a seat in a class that seated more than 400 people. When the class finally started, all of the seats in rows were filled and people were sitting and standing in the hall. The professor walked up to the lectern and introduced himself. Then he stated that he would take no interruptions or questions. He walked over to a map of the world covering the blackboard. He raised the map. On the blackboard was listed the required reading, papers that would be due, test times, and other class instructions. He returned to the lectern, opened his book, and began lecturing from Plato's Allegory of the Cave. When he was finished, he turned around and I walked out. Class was over. The next week, the room was full again, but there were seats for everyone. Same process, no questions or interruptions. I was in over my head. I was doing all of the reading, something I didn't do in high school, but I was lost. The third week, I put on my dress blues. Walking across campus past the demonstrators, I was the recipient of the evil eye. A couple of people spit in our direction. They didn't get close enough to be effective. One of the guys I was walking with had played football for the University of Washington. When we walked into the lecture hall, the room was only half full. I walked to the front of the room and sat directly under the lectern. When the professor came in and started his lecture, I stood up at attention in my Popeye suit with my Dixie cup on my head. He stopped lecturing, leaned over, and asked me, "May I help you?" "Sir, this is the first college class I've ever taken. I don't have any idea what you're talking about." He relaxed, stepped away from the lectern, and said to everyone, "I'm sorry. I have to do this every term to get rid of the war protesters." The ice was broken, everyone laughed, and it was full steam ahead. The first paper I wrote was on Descartes. I think, therefore I am. I received a B. My college career was underway. In February, I received a letter of acceptance from George Fox College, a small liberal arts school with a great science department 9 miles from my parents' home in Oregon. I made my visitation and completed my paperwork. I took a copy of my acceptance to the personnel office at NAS Alameda to apply for an early out in September. My active duty didn't expire until November 27th. Again, all of my friends mocked me for being so gung-ho. Later that spring, I took the exam for Navy promotion to E5, HM2. The war was ramping up even more as munitions and war materials flowed in to be loaded onto aircraft carriers home ported there. Then there were the ambulance trips to Travis Air Force Base to pick up wounded Marines and naval personnel from across the pond to be delivered to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital. Reality set in on my fellow corpsmen. Everybody E4 and under had all gone to corpsman school about the same time. Most of us were going to get out when our tour of duty was over that fall. Then, in June 1965, President Johnson announced the need for more troops to be sent to Vietnam. All active duty personnel would be extended 1 year of additional duty, but I was exempted from that order because the Department of the Navy had approved me to go to college. There were long faces from the rest of the bunch because most of the guys were transferred to Camp Pendleton, assigned to the Fleet Marine Force, and then sent to Vietnam. Through it all, I've always been proud of serving in uniform. Michael Boehme was born in the Pacific Northwest and grew up in Sherwood, Oregon. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1961 and became a corpsman. After Corps School, he became a ward corpsman at Balboa Naval Hospital and then went on to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in 1962 through 1963. From 1964 to 1965, he served in General Medical at Naval Air Station, Alameda, California. He then served in the active reserves at Swan Island in Portland, Oregon from 1965 to 1967. Michael graduated from George Fox College and interned in medical laboratory technology. He and his wife, Mary Ann, reside in East Bay, North Bend, Oregon. Chapter 26, Back from the Grave. John Jakeway, U.S. Army, 3rd of the 187th Infantry, 101st Airborne Division, Vietnam, 1967 to 1968. 50 years ago, I was a 20-year-old soldier in the jungles of Vietnam, lying on the ground at night. We were near a village, and as the night wore on, we started hearing chanting from the village place of worship. We had never heard anything like this before, and it was the most surreal moment of my life. We did not know at the time, but this was the beginning of the Great Tet Offensive of January 1968. All holy hell was about to break loose, and we would be caught right in the middle of it. Every outfit has to have its first casualty. You arrive in Vietnam as a unit. Nobody has any experience except for a few veterans that have volunteered to ship over with us. For a while, no one gets hurt. The weeks go by, then suddenly the first blood is drawn. You experience bullets going over your head for the first time, AK-47 rounds, and you realize for the first time you could be killed there. The medic runs past you towards the gunfire while you are lying flat on the ground. You fight your fears, then stand up and follow the medic, who is no longer in sight. Then you suddenly get to the front and the shooting is over. You look down and see someone you know being worked on by the medics. His arm is shattered, and you know he will lose it. But for us, it was time to move forward. The wounded man is quickly forgotten, and you regain your focus on the job at hand. Every day in Vietnam was a day of uncertainty. For the most part, days just rolled on by, each day being no different from the last. The endless hump, which busts your balls, and the heat and humidity that relentlessly saps every ounce of water out of your body. The straps on your Alice pack digging into your shoulders with a pain that only an infantryman can know. One agonizing step after another, but you must keep going until at last the column stops and you are given a break. You fall to the ground right where you stand. Your Alice pack sort of supports your back in a semi-upright position. Suddenly your world is 100% better because you are off your feet and the weight of all your gear is not digging into your flesh. The piece of ground you are on is a beautiful place. Any place you are on the ground resting is a beautiful place. This was the case on the afternoon of March 21st, 1968, somewhere in Vietnam. So far, it was just a normal day for us, but this was about to change. I did not know it at the time, but my life was about to change forever in just minutes, as well as the lives of a few others. For some, their lives were about to end in just a few minutes. We were on a break when other elements of our unit made contact with the enemy about 300 yards from our position. We were immediately given the order to saddle up and head for the firefighting raging in front of us. I saw a large explosion down at the firefight scene, and I watched as what looked like a person flying up in the air. As I ran towards the fight, I saw a fire in the direction that I was moving, and as I got close to the fire, it exploded, throwing me backwards to the ground. I was a bit stunned lying there and did not have a clue that I was wounded, but in fact I had 3 pieces of steel in me. I made several attempts to get to my feet with no success. Why couldn't I get to my feet? I thought. Finally, I looked at my belly area and saw the blood coming up through my clothes. I was astonished, and as soon as I saw it, the intense pain hurt like hell. As I brought my hands into my stomach area, I saw that my left hand was hit, with blood coming out of the back. Then I saw my right hand had been hit. The thumb joint had been shattered, and a ball of flesh was dangling. As soon as I saw it, it started hurting like hell. Up to this point, I had always been the soldier looking down at the wounded, never thinking that it would be me down on the ground looking up. I suppose this was my day of reckoning. After all, what goes around comes around. Down at the firefight scene, they were putting the wounded on a medevac chopper, as well as one dead man, Anthony Nicholson, a friend of mine. He was in a body bag. The chopper lifted off, but did not make it far as it was shot down. And then the Viet Cong shot all the survivors. I was lying wounded on the ground while one of our medics, Ken, who would be killed later, was fixing me up. I remember that he kept saying, "Take it easy, Jake." Finally, another medevac came in for me and the other 3 wounded from the same explosion, but we worried also that we would be shot down. Taken to the MASH unit at Long Bin, I was placed on the floor for 5 hours before they could get to me. Then I found out that Anthony had come back from the grave. He was never dead because the enemy had passed him over as they were shooting everyone else. He was bagged up, so they thought he was. It just happened that Anthony got sent to the MASH unit at Long Bin also, but he was sent to the morgue next door. And then, out of the blue, he comes around in the body bag and scared the crap out of everyone. Immediately, they went to work on him and removed a piece of metal stuck in his head, and he survived. I was blown away that my buddy Anthony had returned from the grave. Strange things happen in war. John Jakeway served in the U.S. Army and was with the 3rd of the 187th Infantry, 101st Airborne Division in Vietnam, 1967 to 1968. Chapter 27, Grunts on Angel Wings. Russell Clark, USMC, 1st Lieutenant, India Company, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment, Vietnam, August 1969 to July 1970. The monsoons had lifted. The torrents that hammered us senseless for several weeks were over. But the water from above was replaced by the thick vapor that seemed to be in every breath we took. Heavy humidity, intense heat, and the oppressive nature of the terrain itself sapped our energy and drowned our spirits. Morale was low, owing to the environment and the elusive nature of the enemy. The VC had been active through the rainy months, with sniper fire, booby traps, mortars, and ambushes taking their gruesome toll. Nights were especially treacherous. The enemy owned the hours of darkness, and our illumination rounds gave us only temporary respite from the frustration of being unable to find and destroy our nemesis. We had so much firepower at our disposal, but poor peasants in pajamas were making us look like helpless giants. Whenever we moved after dusk, we could almost feel hundreds of eyes on us. The VC knew the terrain, and it seemed that they had the nocturnal vision of jungle cats. Sleeping was nearly impossible for fear that a sapper would get through the perimeter and drop a satchel charge or slit a throat. It was on such a night, while I was commanding a rifle company of Marines, when orders came from battalion to move into a blocking position a kilometer to the north. My first reaction was, what kind of maniac would issue such a command? Moving over 200 Marines through heavy brush right into an area of operation, AO, we knew was hostile, seemed like a suicide mission. But I suppose out of loyalty and duty, I sent the message to my 4 platoons, saddle up, and off we stumbled down overgrown trails right into the maw of perdition. And then the evening was shattered by an explosion coming from the direction of my point platoon. I had my radio man call immediately to learn what we'd run into, and I braced myself for the ugly report. The voice on the other end gave me the grim news that I had feared. Many casualties, 1 KIA, and then the name came to us in code. Lance Corporal Goldman had been blown apart when an AK-47 round struck the anti-tank weapon he was carrying. His remains were scattered in the mud and the murk. I reported this to battalion headquarters and was told to stop our part of the mission. I knew that in order to get choppers to us in the morning and after the dense fog lifted, we could clear a landing zone, LZ. India Company then set up, and our position was in some of the worst and least defensible parts of Quang Province. But we had no choice. Our Navy medical corpsmen, may God forever bless them, did their best to attend to the needs of the wounded. We then covered what body parts we could find of Corporal Goldman, and I learned later that 2 of his friends had found his head after searching in the blackness. They had placed it near the rest of what they could retrieve. I needed to try to be a comforter that night to those who had lost a brother. His platoon commander and sergeant were grieving the loss of a good Marine and the injuring of so many others. The unit had been decimated, and we would have to shift personnel to continue the mission after the choppers came at daybreak. I was also grieving, but I dared not show it. I learned much later that the grief I buried at the moment would surface in horrific ways decades into the future. My grief was exacerbated because Goldman was in my platoon months earlier, long before I took leadership of the company. He was one of my favorites, always grinning, always walking, humping, with a good spirit, and always making friends. I recall having to reprimand him on one occasion when he tried to befriend me, forgetting that there has to be distance between officers and enlisted. But I liked him, and I hope he came to respect and value my leadership. I often longed to know how much my men realized the care and concern I had for them, and my fervent desire to bring them all home from Vietnam. I suppose the emptiness I feel to this day is at least partially what the counselors now call survivor guilt. Did I do enough? Could I have made better decisions? Would the 5 warriors I lost still be alive if my leadership had been more efficient? Questions that will never find an answer on this side of eternity, and maybe not on the far side either. Now, when I'm in Washington, D.C., I always make a trip to the Vietnam Memorial and to the names I know. My first stop is Sammy Wayne Goldman. I linger there sometimes for several minutes to pay my respects. I thank him for being such a good Marine and tell him I'm sorry he couldn't have lived to make it back to America, to get married and raise a family, to see his children and grandchildren graduate, and to savor the happy life that he deserved. I also tell him I'm sorry for an incident that is burned into my brain as a haunting memory that I've lived with for 50 years, and one that I'll carry to my shadowy grave. When the sun rose on that scene of carnage, the choppers came and retrieved the wounded. Before they took the remains of Goldman, my sergeant asked me if I wanted to go see the body. Without thinking, I said, no. So he went alone and returned after a few minutes, describing what he had witnessed. A shudder went up my spine, and a toxic flow of pain and guilt coursed through my veins and arteries. Words cannot describe the agony of soul that I felt that morning as the searing sun broke through the canopy above our throbbing heads. I had failed to pay my respects. I had cowered when my moment of leadership arrived. I had neglected the Marines who had gathered around their fallen comrade, and I'll never understand what kept me from rising to the occasion. Oh, I've done a good job of making excuses and rationalizing for half a century. I've told myself that I would have broken down in front of my men, and that would have erased whatever confidence they had in me. I've tried to convince myself that I wasn't able to see one more dead body. I had seen too many in the 8 months prior to that incident. And I've even attempted to attribute my behavior to early PTSD, a malady that would almost destroy my life 25 years later. But all these defense mechanisms fall flat when I'm alone at night, listening to the voice of my conscience and trying to stay away from Jim Beam Black. The only closure I've found, and the only balm I've been given to soothe and heal my broken soul, is the assurance that God forgave me long ago and gave me not one, but many new beginnings along the way. I'm further comforted knowing that Sammy and my other brave Marines were taken on angel wings to their immortal home. And one day I hope to be welcomed by all of them, not as a commander, but as a fellow warrior who did his best for God and country. May it be so for everyone who reads this faltering yet faithful story. Russ Clark is a native son of Pennsylvania who served in the U.S. Marine Corps 1968 to 1971. In Southeast Asia, he served with 2 Marine divisions as platoon commander, company commander, and briefing officer to the division commander. He was awarded the Bronze Star and Purple Heart for his action in Vietnam. Following military service, he enjoyed a career as a United Methodist minister in Ohio, earning degrees in theology and mental health counseling. Accepting disability leave in 1998, he received counseling for PTSD and became an outpost leader for Point Man Ministries. He spends most of the year in Columbus, Ohio, and winters in Seagrove Beach, Florida, with his wife, Martha.